You're listening to Best Forevers, a podcast for kindred spirits, a podcast that encourages you to love more of your friends and to further consider the issues that plague friendships. I'm Alysa Lucas, and we've reached the time to have the quote-unquote talk, friends. We've discussed the process of romantic relationships and the breakups and how that applies to friendships, and we've discussed a series of assessments to help us determine if we should end a friendship or not. So today is the day. We're going to talk about the ways to actually end the friendship when we've decided it is time. And this can be scary and uncomfortable, but take it slow, figure out what works best for you and your friendship, and then move forward. So let's go ahead and talk about the main ways that you can end your friendship. So one of the first ways is that you could do an immediate split or ghosting. So one option is to simply end the relationship immediately. And this could happen if there's some sort of relationship betrayal or some sort of event that means immediate ending, or there might be another reason why you need to ghost or split with your friend. Certainly, this is not an ideal option, especially if this is a long-term friendship or if you'll be connected in the future. So it might be hard to ghost someone if they're like, hey, at work or whatever, if you see them at the local Target or grocery store. So we have to consider what the situation is for ourselves, for the relationship, and for the future, what it's going to look like. So, for example, according to WikiHow and PS Friends, per usual, all of my sources are in show notes, so you can check out those articles. What they say on WikiHow is not having a conversation may lead your friend wondering and guessing what they did wrong or what happened. And something that we all know about breakups overall is that we enjoy and appreciate, even though it might not be fun at the time, we appreciate some level of closure, right? So sort of the joke I say is I interviewed at a university in 2009. And I say, and I use this example in class, and you probably heard it on here because I reuse my jokes, right? Is that I'm like, oh, I'm still waiting to hear. I hope I got it. Like 12 years later, I did not get the job, but I don't know why I wasn't hired. That'd be weird if I was hired and I just didn't show up. No, I wasn't hired. But they didn't send an email. They didn't send a form letter. It's like everyone avoided me at the next academic conference. And so one of the things is like, what did I do wrong? Was I not a good interviewee? Did I not fit into the department? Maybe there's nothing I could have done. In juxtaposition to another job that I applied for, I was their top 2 choice, and I didn't have enough experience teaching the theory class at that time. And the reason why I know that is because the person in charge of the committee for hiring called me and told me. Now, when she called, I thought I got the job because I was like, they're calling. And then, it's upsetting I didn't get the job. But I also really appreciate the fact that she took the time to let me know that they really enjoyed me, and here's what I did well, here's why it didn't work out. And if I apply for that job again, they couldn't say that my theory experience was the reason, because I've taught theory for at least 6 years straight. So, but that's the difference, right? It's like 12 years later, do I know? Or is it like, oh, I immediately know why I didn't get the job, and there is something nice about knowing that they did like me, right? They liked me. You really like me, right? A little, oh goodness, I forgot her name. Why do I always do this when I'm on? I can see all the movies, Mrs. Sally Field. Okay. Oh, thanks for sticking with me, friends. Okay, so really the point here is that closure is helpful, and ghosting or an immediate split might not provide that. So the idea here also is that if your friendship was face-to-face, if it started that way, it was maintained that way, that's how you friended, and that's how you were doing friending, thus it should end that way, right? So that is something that we get from long-distance relationships, right? And this is except if your safety and well-being is at risk. And that is something that is not like, I should still do this face-to-face because that's more respectful. if you're concerned about your safety, then a clear break or ghosting is probably the best option, and don't regret that decision at all. Okay? Because again, everyone deserves to be happy, healthy, and safe. Healthy and safe are critical in these conversations, of course. So going back to the long distance romantic relationships I was mentioning, from that, we understand that a lot of times relationships might not always happen face to face. They might not be maintained face to face. So, what about people who met online and maintain their relationships online and on the phone? It is perfectly acceptable to end a relationship online that started online, right? So, those are some things to consider. Again, what is the best way to end your friendship? It's scary. It can be uncomfortable. We don't like to have these conversations. But if you figure out what works best for you, your friendship, and the situation you're in, then you can feel more confident with the decision that you made and the way in ending that friendship specifically. The second way that you can end a friendship is through changing the relationship. So according to WebMD, they say you can just let it go. That's an option. And that fits here because friendships are likely to change, transition, and some are likely to fade out over time. So in episode 141, we were on a break. We talked about taking a break from our friendships. And I just wanted to remind you that here is still an option. Sometimes we just need time. We need to see our friendship from a new perspective. Sometimes we might just want to see, like, is this actually a concern, or am I just being I'm just overreacting? Is this something that is a deal breaker for me? And giving you that time to sort of reflect on it without them around is helpful. So if you need to take a break, take a break. And again, consider that taking a break, that is part of changing the relationship, right? That you can come back to it in a different way. But that also means that you can sort of change the status of the relationship. So in a friendship that I did end when I was 25 years old, I first tried to make some changes. I guess I saw it as giving us both a chance. Maybe I was wrong about the things that bother me. Maybe she was wrong about some of the things that she did. Or in this case, I can't assume that it was only her, that maybe there's some things that I did. So in this case, I took advice from a friend who said we don't have to do everything, be everything, and tell our friends everything in a friendship. So we don't have to be everything to them, and they don't have to be everything to us. And at that time, that was sort of like a mind blown moment. Like, get the emoji where the mind is blown, because I had always considered friendship. Like, I'm like Anna Green Gables. I'm going all in. I'm like cutting my hair and making a blood bond with Diane Barry. Like, I always saw friendship. It's like, we talk about everything. We can do everything together. We can spend this time together. But that doesn't always have to be the case. And so this friend who gave me advice, her name is Kat. So thank you, Kat. But specifically, it really changed my perspective on friendships, and that, maybe we could be friends that go and watch sports and talk about sports, or we could go do movies, or maybe we check in once a month over coffee. We don't have to constantly spend time with each other every day, or we don't. And at this time, was this the time? Did I have a pager when I was 25? I don't even know when cell phones happened. I feel so old right now. But now that we're so connected, you don't have to like text all day. You don't have to do all of these things. You can make the friendship work for all of you as y'all see fit. And so in this case, I tried to move the friendship to one that focused on going to the movies and then talking about them over coffee. And although that didn't work out, and it didn't become a different kind of friendship, it was worth a shot, in my opinion, because, again, I was trying to see if maybe I was wrong, or maybe, like, there was something that we could fix, or whatever the case is, but that didn't end up being the case, and so then I ended up having to move forward with a different type of ending to the relationship. Now, verywellmind.com talks about the fade out or taking the break and changing the relationship as a quote unquote kinder option, but it can take a long time, for example, to fade out if the other person isn't picking up what you're putting down, if you know what I mean. Like, they're not going, oh, we're fading out. Like, if that's not the case, then there isn't some level of shared meaning, or they don't see the transition in the way that you do, or they're not willing to fade out in the same way. And so then you might have to move to a different way to end the relationship. So that leads us to what most people probably think of when they think of breakups, romantic or otherwise, and that is having the talk. Now, according to WebMD, quote, having one last conversation may be a better choice, even if it's hard to talk about what happened or why the friendship isn't working for you anymore. No matter how you end a friendship, try to be respectful of the other person's feelings, especially if your breakup is one-sided. You can be respectful while being honest and firm. Tell your friend while you're stepping away, but pay attention to how you deliver the news. Be kind and mature, especially if your friend didn't see it coming and feels hurt or confused by your decision, end quote. And this is something that I talk a lot about in my classes, that it's not just the words you say, so we want to choose words wisely. And I think we don't give enough credit, or what's the word I'm looking for? We don't give enough credit, or we don't give enough weight to the words that we choose. But we also have to consider how we say it. I think that's what most people remember. Isn't that a Maya Angelou quote? They might not remember what you said to them or what you did, but they'll definitely remember how you made them feel. And that comes down to delivery. Do you say it with an attitude? Like, ugh. Sorry, that's my impression of an attitude. Or what I call huffing and puffing, like a lot of sighing, like, so I don't want to be your friend anymore. So we have to think about how we do it. Do we say it with an accusatory tone? Do we say it in a neutral way, both in how we say it and the words that we choose? So both think about verbal and nonverbal communication when you're having this conversation. And although it might seem dorky to do so, you might even practice it a little bit before you do it. I think a lot of times, especially in maybe unrelated here, but especially in bystander relationships, we might not necessarily say anything because we don't have the words, which means we haven't said it before. We haven't thought about it in advance. And I think that can apply here in the sense that if we think about what we're going to say, we say them aloud, then those words become easier to use when we are, in fact, in that conversation with other people. Now, goodhousekeeping.com, an article from the web in 2021, indicates a conversation can help you if you want to, quote, gauge their response. So how are they responding to it? Do they agree? Are they blindsided? Those sorts of things might help you determine how you then respond to them and move forward with the conversation. A conversation can be helpful if you want to be helpful to your friend, thinking about closure. And that also allows you to talk through boundaries, which is critical, especially if you're going to be around each other because you have similar social circles, you live in the same town and it's small, or, use the same gym, or you work in the same building. Those sorts of things can be really important in having the conversation. So here's what you want to do. And this might be the most important piece of advice that you will hear today. Ask your friend to meet face to face. But like with romantic relationships, we probably should not say, hey, we need to talk, period. Whether that's verbally or text message, that's just a yikes on a bike sort of moment, because no one likes to hear we need to talk. Whether it's a romantic partner, a friend, a parent, a boss, people immediately think the worst. And although this conversation could be very difficult for both parties, that's certainly not the way in which to introduce the topic to them. And it can make it scarier for everyone involved. And it just, yikes, right? It's just one of those things, like, we should just eliminate that term from our our little vernacular, because it just has changed meaning, right? Like, hey, we need to talk. All right, cool, we'll talk later. We need to talk oh God, what happened? What's wrong? What's going on? What did I do? What's happened to you? People just start to worry. And if your friend has anxiety or other things, just be thoughtful about how you start it. Say like, hey, can we grab some coffee on this day? And just schedule it up. And WikiHow suggests that you pick a quiet but public place in case it does get heated. Although that's not the goal, that can happen, especially if someone was blindsided or they feel hurt and defensive. Or this quiet public space can also allow you or them to leave quickly as they might need to, or as you might need to. So verywellmind.com talks about having a goal for this conversation. So you've set up the time, it's in a public, quiet place. And so people are like, what is that? Maybe a park. Like I think about in town, there's a park here where there's always lots of people around, but there's still room for you to have space without everyone overhearing everything. Outdoor at a coffee shop, for example. Those are the sorts of the places you want. But once you have that set, Very Well Mind is like, let's be sure we have a goal for the conversation. So here's their example. It says, start out with a statement that opens the door for more conversation. I've noticed some patterns in our friendship in the past few months that have been bothering me. I wondered if we could talk about it. So one of the things that's nice about this particular example in this statement is that it focuses on you and how you're feeling, and you're asking for conversation. And so going back to good housekeeping, engaging their response, are they willing to have that conversation? Are they going to say something like, there's some things that have been bothering me too, or oh, I had no idea, but yes, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Like you can then move forward knowing how they respond, right? And so it might indicate to you if this is going to be a more productive conversation, or if maybe you're going to be using that public quiet exit a lot faster, right? So overall, I think this example highlights a really important part of having conversations with other people that is about conflict in some way, or that about ending a friendship or ending any particular relationship. So be prepared to share your feelings by using what we call I language. This means the focus is on you and you're not loading a laundry list of items of things that they've done wrong according to your point of view, right? Like, so if it's just like, well, and then you never listened to me and then you left me here and you did this and you never, that's not I language, that's you language, and it places blame on the other person. So we want to focus on how we're feeling. And an example, as you could see from Very Well Mind, was I've noticed some patterns in our friendship. I wondered we could talk about it. I feel like this particular pattern, and then you could go into talk about it. That's the one that has me wondering how our friendship is going right now. So another thing could be like, or another example could be like, I feel like my time isn't important because plans are canceled or changed or started past the time agreed upon. What I need is the time dedicated to us, or I need to move on. So all that is like, I feel like, so again, it focuses on you because it gives a reason, and then it indicates what you need. And so what you're maybe requesting or what you're asking for. And in this case, it's either the time or moving on, right? And WikiHow gives the example of you could just like straight forward right out the gate. It's pretty clear and succinct. I don't think we should hang out anymore. And here's why, right? And again, it's what I think. It's not putting the blame on them. And so why we don't want to do that, right? If we use the you language, it focuses on them in a way that sounds accusatory, blaming, and saying that everything that they've done is wrong. You were never there for me. You always made me feel bad about myself. You never showed up on time. You weren't there for me when my boyfriend broke up with me. So on and so forth. And then the you language, I mean, is to someone who's listening, it just feels like a pile of blame, right? And so if you want the conversation to be productive, then that pile up is something that you don't want to occur. It's going to maybe turn the conversation away that isn't going to be productive how you want. You could also use something to consider is using relationship-focused language. Our lives are changing, so can we talk about what that transition might look like? It seems like we might not have time for each other anymore. And so it's one of those things where it's focused on the relationship and how the relationship is changing. But this is truly the time. So where you're focusing on that I language, eliminating the you can use the we or the us or the our, but basically when you're talking to them, the goal is to understand your position. So having some level of shared meaning is critical. Having clear explanation is critical. Being succinct is critical. So you don't want to go into a diatribe about something that happened 3 years ago, right? It's like, let's be straightforward. Here's what's going on. And your position is set. You've been thinking about this a long time, right? You've listened to at least 2 previous Best Forevers episodes on the topic, if not more. So one of the things is to consider is, as WikiHow suggests, is not to immediately change your position once you see your friend or they respond to you. So it's like, oh, you're right. Okay, yeah, and completely change your position. This is important to you. And this is something that you've been thinking about. And it isn't easy, but here sort of stick to your guns. Unless there truly was something like a misunderstanding and being able to talk to each other helped you maybe move forward. And if you still want to have the friendship, that's up to you. But that's not something that I would consider would be immediate or happening in every single situation where you're having the talk with someone where you'd like to end the friendship. When you've shared your position, this is also a chance for you to listen. You give them a chance to talk as well. Okay? And so that is pretty important to you just don't go in there and be like, well, I don't want to hang out anymore, so deuces, see you later alligator, smell you later, right? That it's, let them respond, because also this is a moment of closure. And so you do want to listen because they might also have a few things they'd like to share with you. So once you've shared your position and you've given them a chance to talk as well and you've listened, this might be the time then to leave, right? WikiHow says not to apologize for ending the friendship. So this isn't like, I'm sorry, we can't be friends anymore. Apologies are for when you've done something wrong, and there isn't anything wrong with ending a friendship that doesn't fulfill your needs. Same way as ending a relationship that romantically is not working out for you. There isn't anything inherently wrong with ending a friendship, especially if it's something that isn't fulfilling your needs, it makes you feel bad, and all the different assessments that we talked about in the previous episode. So there are no apologies unless you have done something wrong, and that is part of the conversation. Also consider how the future will go, especially if you plan to keep in touch in some way, or that you'll be connected because of the grocery store, the gym, the workplace, other friends, etc. So this is, what are the boundaries? So are you going to stay in touch somehow? If it's, how do you plan to work together? What do you do? Like, let's say hi and we can catch up, but we're just not hanging out anymore, those sorts of things. That is a really good chance to be clear about expectations for both parties so that you know what to do the next time you see each other. Because sometimes it's just like, so the relationship's over, and then it's like, well, what do you do when you have similar friends? Or, do you start avoiding each other? Like, you still want to live your lives, and they might be in it, but it doesn't mean that the relationship has to be something more than just catching up or saying hi. So the Good Housekeeping article about ending friendships from 2021 provides these ways to make this conversation a little bit better. First off, and again, this is a reminder, make it about how you're feeling. So that's using the I statements. Share responsibility. It's not everything that they've done. It's not everything of what you're feeling. This could also be a reminder of using relationship-based language, right? Focusing on the verbal and the nonverbal. Keep the conversation neutral. In the article on Good Housekeeping, they talk about not using the word toxic. And that's because people will respond to that word in a negative way. And so it makes the conversation less productive. And there's probably more words than toxic, dysfunctional, not good for me. Like there might just be things that if you say it, might be like using you language, or it's just because the words are loaded and attached to a lot of different emotions that can make it maybe more difficult for them to hear your message, to understand the message, and to respond to the message. So think about the words, choose your words wisely, and then say them wisely. And another good reminder, stay out of the weeds. Look at the bigger picture, be succinct, and don't go into every detail. So, according to my list of things you've done wrong, on October 16th, 2004, no, don't bring up old stuff like that, right? That's too much. And then it's like, it'll turn into something that is counterproductive and could include more heat and argument, so on and so forth. And typically when people are backed into a corner like that and they feel blamed or attacked, then they might lash out because that's what we're going to do, right? We're more likely to confront and maybe be aggressive if we feel like our rights are being violated and we have no other option because we are backed into that corner. And then in terms of boundaries, yes, lay out your expectations for moving forward. And I do like this last one that Good Housekeeping suggests, and that is wish them well. Because one of the things is just because the relationship isn't working out for you doesn't mean that there aren't fond thoughts that you have about this person, or that you didn't have, this wonderful time or these great memories, unless they've done something completely unacceptable or unethical or betrayal. Wishing them well means that you're rooting for them. You're just no longer hanging out. So we don't want to see you fail. So we want to see you succeed and hope that you continue with your career, your goals, your hobbies, whatever the case is. Wishing them well seems like a good way to end before you leave that quiet public place. Okay, so that's the talk, which is obviously has the most detail. Can be hard to do, coming up with the courage to do this. I mean, I think it does take a lot to have these conversations, and it can be difficult, right? So one of the things is I've had a conversation like this specifically, and I would say that there was friendship and work intertwined here, but met someone outside a coffee shop, so the quiet public place. And so this, I'm trying to remember, I think we were both encouraged to have this conversation since it was work related. I didn't feel like I needed to be a part of the conversation, but I still went. And because we all have our own thoughts about how things are going on. Like, even though some people might be blindsided, other people know these conversations might come at some point or another. Something might not be right in your friendship, or you're growing apart, or things have changed. And when the person sat down, I felt like I was getting the pile on. This is why you're not a good coworker. This is why you're the worst. Okay, that's a paraphrase. I can laugh about it now. I cried about it before, but it just felt like a pile on. And so I think that's something that we need to consider, is that when we're on the end of it, what it might feel like. And so having the talk, being thoughtful about how we go about it. And I'll talk about that example in just another moment, because I have some other, final tips that'll be critical. So that example will come back up. Now, we do have another option. We can write a letter. So sometimes we don't feel like we get to say everything we want, or that our feelings may not be validated, which might be the reason why we're ending the friendship. And so writing a letter may be helpful for some. In fact, Good Housekeeping says that writing a letter can make it seem safer to go ahead and end the friendship. Or consider that the relationship may have ended immediately. So think about the first option we talked about, just like clear cut or ghost or something like that, but you still want to get some thoughts or feelings off your chest. That gives you a chance to write them out. And one thing that's nice about writing a letter, which I believe breakup letters are called Dear John or Dear Jane emails or letters. And so a handwritten letter, maybe an email, all I guess would suffice here. But one of the things that not everyone is good face to face, right? Not everyone is firing on all cylinders, right? Some people are really nervous, and this is a nerve-wracking conversation that we're having, right? So when you think about writing, it gives us time to really think about what we want to say, to write it down, to write it over, to edit it, to crumble it up and throw it into a trash can, turn it into a sitcom montage where it's like, 50 different, smashed up pieces of paper going into the trash can. But basically, this is something that we're not able to do when we're face to face. And for some people, this is a safer, stronger, and better option for them, that they can feel like they can be themselves and be able to get everything out. However, if you write a letter, you might indicate, or you might think about that you will get a letter back. You might get a response. It might not be the response you want. So you have to be ready to get a response, even though it might not be what you're hoping for. So the relationship that I tried to change by turning it into like movies and coffee, I ended up writing a letter. And I think at that time I was far too scared to do it face to face. And which is I guess funny in a way, because one of the person's issues with me is that I was too confrontational. And I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily confrontational in an aggressive way, that I am fairly open in talking about things. And that's what confrontational essentially means, is that you talk about it. But it's one of those loaded words now. People see it negatively. So I didn't want to appear too confrontational. So I wrote an email and I indicated the reasons why I didn't think we should be friends anymore. And then I did get a response back. And the response was, and this is paraphrased, is like, don't put your shit off on me. And I was like, okie dokies. So they were defensive. They felt blamed. And I was like, I just have to accept that that is their response. And this is someone I don't think I've seen or talked to her since this happened almost 20 years ago, right? So we just had to be ready for whatever that response might be, or that they might want to write a letter to also get closure. So there are some tips, right, for managing the end of a friendship. So you want to be prepared. So verywellmind.com indicates that you should be prepared that your friend is probably going to feel hurt and they're going to be defensive, and that it's especially why it's important to use the I language over the you language. They also indicate that the friend might not understand why you would want to end the friendship, and so that's where clarity is important without getting into all of the details, right? And we just have to be prepared that they might also want to clear the air in that moment, in the talk, in a letter back. They might be asking about it if you try to fade out or if you try to ghost or end it immediately, that they still might want to talk to you or have something to say. So it's not just about you. You're ending a friendship and there's another person there. So we can't just assume that we can go in and talk. I said what I had to say, bye, and then you just drive off. Now, if there is a safety issue, obviously never regret the decision to protect your safety, but also consider that, again, having a conversation, writing the letter, these sorts of things can be helpful to the friend, and we can't assume that we didn't contribute to the end of the friendship as well, and so we have to be ready. One thing that I often think about, and especially something that I talk about in my classes when we talk about conflict, is that emotion is essentially contagious. Have you ever been like in a bad mood and then someone's just like super in a good mood and that sort of rubs off on you? Or maybe the other way, you come into work and you're happy and then you're like, okay, Debbie Downers, way to kill the mood, killing my vibes, right? So one of the things that I think is that there's a reciprocation of emotion. So if you go in hot, people are going to come back hot at you, right? And sometimes people say, I don't know why they came at me like that. And my first question would be like, how did you come at them, right? So it's this reciprocation. So again, if we come in hot, they're going to be hot. But if we come in calm, they're likely to be calm. If they're aggressive or mean in response to that calmness, then you can end the conversation or leave through that quiet public space, right? And so going back to the example I gave where I met someone, I didn't think I needed to be in this conversation, but because it had to do with work, I went. I met them at the public place, and from my point of view, and she has her own, I felt like she spent the majority of the time telling me what I had done wrong or what my problems were, that I was I was horrible because of this. I was inappropriate because of that. I didn't do work. I was a horrible colleague, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just sat there and listened. Okay? And so I didn't say anything. I didn't respond with facial expressions. I tried to remain calm. I waited calmly. And when she seemed to be finished, there was a break. I asked if there was anything else that she wanted to share. Well, she said that she was done. And I said something along the lines of, I don't know what I can do to change your mind about me. It seems like there are expectations about me that I don't know about, and thus I'm unable to fulfill successfully. So that's like a paraphrase. And so her next response was a lot more calm than it had been previously, because this was probably something that had bothered her for years, and I had no idea, right? So and so it makes sense that she comes in mad, but it's not going to be a productive conversation. And I didn't think like getting mad back at her was going to be helpful. And truly, I just felt like if I didn't know, I don't know what I don't know, right? And so I just thought, let's just ask her a question, say this thing, and then it soon wrapped up after that, because I was like, I don't know what I could do to change your mind, right? Like, this is how you feel. And so I was calm about it, and I think it changed the conversation to be a little bit more calm. And we had other conversations after that I think were much calm. I think it was just at the surface and raw, and I can understand that. I mean, it doesn't necessarily make me feel good to hear all those things about me from her point of view, but I just took it and then was like, well, I could make this aggressive, or I could just be calm and see if I can change the outcome of this conversation. The last tip is to consider that your friend may not want to end the friendship. So you might get some manipulation, some bribery, any sort of behaviors that will try to get you back into the friendship. So you might consider being prepared for some guilt trips. And if you're someone who's like, oh, if I feel guilty, I'm going to crack. I'm going to fold like a card, what did they say? A house of cards. Yes. Then, just be ready. They're going to make me feel guilty. But that isn't going to change my position, right? There could be lots of other tips that might happen here. There might be a lot of other things that might happen in the conversation that make it more difficult. But no matter what, when we're at the end of the conversation, we're going to be in a place of sadness, right? So, expect sadness, expect a period of grief. Even if you wanted to end the friendship and the conversation was quote unquote successful, or as successful as it could be, you're still likely to experience sadness over the loss of a friend. You also have to consider that you probably spent a lot of time worrying and ruminating or being upset or being mad about things, and it was probably exhausting, so you're tired, right? So there might be some of that, like all this weight of energy and emotion and time and thinking is now being lifted. It might not feel good, but we got to be prepared for that level of grieving, and it's okay to make the right decision for yourself and still feel bad about it for some time. But we're going to talk about that in our next episode. But one thing I thought about as I was preparing this episode is this often comes from the point of view of the person who might be ending the relationship. Now, I just gave an example where I was sort of on the end of getting the information. So I think it's important to talk about what happens if you're on the end of the ending, right? It can also be sad. It can be surprising. You might have seen it coming, 500 miles away, but we're not always the one ending the friendship. Sometimes we're on the other end. And so there are a few things that we might consider doing if we find ourselves in that situation. The first thing is we can listen. if this is someone that's been our friend, then I think they deserve some time in which to talk, right? Know that this conversation was probably very difficult for them to do. So hearing them out shows some level of care and respect, right? That like I see that this means a lot to you, or it's something that hurts you, and so I want to listen to you because I think you deserve that respect. We could ask questions or for clarifications so we understand their position, but this might not be in like, oh, we've turned this 20-minute conversation into a 15-hour conversation. Like, no, that coffee shop probably wants you to clear that table. Right? We got other people coming in, right? But sometimes it might just be like, I just want to be sure I understand, and that sort of thing. We can be respectful of their choice, right? That these relationships are voluntary. There's nothing that says that we have to be their friends or they have to be ours. And sometimes these relationships don't work out. Doesn't mean that it's not something that's going to hurt us or that we might not miss, but we can respect that that's their choice, whether they're right or wrong. No. If we're feeling hurt or defensive, we might think about reciprocation, that if we get defensive and express the anger, then that might turn the conversation into something that can be counterproductive. So we could express that in a mature way, like, as you might imagine, I'm feeling really hurt about this or confused, and I want to be defensive, but I also understand that this is how you're feeling, and so I might just need some time to sort of like process, and you can manage those emotions later. And consider that having this conversation is helpful to you because you do get some closure rather than what happened to my friend. And the conversation's not going to be perfect. They're not perfect. You're not perfect. And the conversation may end in a way that you're not comfortable with, or you didn't get a chance to say something. And you know what? Your friend should expect or be prepared that you're going to respond. So you could write a letter to provide yourself further closure. So but I know the immediate response might be like, what's going on? You're my best friend. And like, there's so many feelings and emotions that come into it. So again, we're not going for perfection, but we are going for some level of shared meaning and for some level of a productive end, the best that we can. And if it ends up being something that isn't productive, it doesn't feel safe, they're being aggressive or mean, whoever it might be, the person ending it, the person who's just found out that their friend is ending the relationship, then we can leave. We don't have to be there for any type of unnecessary abuse or comments that are rude or inappropriate or problematic. And so that can just be the case. And you know what? One of the things that I think about is this: depending on how people respond, right? We can gauge how they respond, and then that leads us to respond in a way that maybe matches that. Maybe we want to respond in a way is defensive or full of hurt because we want to hurt people back. Something we have to consider is that if someone didn't see this coming, that their immediate response might not be the most accurate way of how they feel. It might be initial response. But we also have to pull back and realize that being aggressive is probably not the best way to go about it anyway. But in the end, if someone doesn't respond well and they write you an email back that says, don't put your shit off on me, or they spend time loading on you and blaming you, or trying to be hurtful in a way because you've ended the friendship, or they're being mean because they did end the friendship, so then they treat you in a way that's problematic, it might just be helpful to remember, well, if that's how they're going to treat me, maybe they weren't my friend to begin with, or this wouldn't be someone I would want to have in my life. And that might give you not so much comfort, but maybe a little comfort in going, maybe this is the right thing for us, that we're no longer friends, right? So there's so much going on here. It's a hard decision to end a friendship, to make those assessments, to finally decide to do it, find the best way to do it, and hope for the most productive conversation that you can have, and that no matter what, there's going to be sadness and grief. So got another episode coming. We're going to talk about how to grieve our lost friendships and how we can work through and cope with that sadness. But I would also like to hear from you. Do you have tips for managing conversations based on ones you had before? Did you have a conversation that went really well, or an end of a friendship that went well that you'd like to talk about? Or maybe one that didn't go well and it was just like, you know what? The immediate split was a good idea. If you have stories to share or if you have questions to ask, please email me at friendswithalysa@gmail.com. I would love to hear your experiences and see how we can't share them with everyone to help those who might be going through a friendship breakup, because they are tough. So don't be too hard on yourself. Keep going. It's not going to be perfect. You just want to do what you can to protect yourself. So until next time, friends, consider that ending a friendship is hard, but that staying in one that doesn't fulfill your needs is even harder. Thanks for listening to Best Forevers. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and of course, share with a friend. Please be sure to follow Best Forevers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Best Forevers Pod, and I'm at Dr. Alysa Lucas on Twitter. You can always find the podcast webpage for more information at bestforeverspod.com, and share your stories of friendship by emailing me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the movement to love on our friends more, check out the podcast on patreon.com/bestforeverspod. Now, friends, check out this recommended podcast that you must get in your ear holes immediately.